So I wanted to try something a little bit different today. I've had a lot of messages before on Pokemon Showdown or on Twitter of people saying, just like thank you for like me helping them out. And I didn't really feel like I'd done anything particularly helpful. It's mostly just me and for the most part Boy just dicking around. But I did want to do something maybe a bit different, maybe a bit helpful, just to kind of give people ideas and something to think about when you're building your teams that maybe you wouldn't have considered, or if you're missing something. And so I thought I'll try this out. It might become a series, I don't know, it depends if people like it. I want to talk about just some kind of fun non-legendary kind of support mons, non-legendary, non-mega for the most part, in VGC 16. And I figured no place better to start than kind of one of my personal favorites, one that I've used pretty much in every single team I made in VGC 15, not so much in VGC 16, but I know that's had a lot of success. And I wanted to talk about Whimsicott in VGC 16. For those of you who aren't aware, Whimsicott is a grass fairy type. It's the only grass fairy type other than its pre-evolution, which is Cottony. As you can see here, it evolves from using a Sunstone. It's got three fairly good abilities, though one severely outclasses the others in regards to how you'd use it in VGC. Infiltrator's got its niche with being able to hit through Substitute and hit through Safeguard in particular. Chlorophyll, obviously you could use it alongside Groudon, but you'd be better off using Jumpluff because it's got Rage Powder. But Prankster is Whimsicott's main selling point. Back onto its typing though. Grass Fairy, as I've said, is quite unique, leaving it with only 5 weaknesses. It's the only thing since Gen 1 quad weak to poison. Unfortunately for Whimsicott, all of its weaknesses are fairly common. So it is quite frail. It is a bit of a problem. But it's got some nice resistances, as you can see here. Fighting, ground, water, grass, electric, dark, and then obviously an immunity to dragon, being a fairy type. So while it's quite common weaknesses, it's also got quite common resistances, which can obviously be used to its advantage. Most notable stat is its speed at base 116, which with max IVs, max EVs, Timid Nature can reach 184. Speed stat is particularly important because it means it outspeeds all of the other available Prankster Pokemon, making it the fastest Prankster user. Before I get into a little bit more detail about Whimsicott itself, I'm going to show you some teams that I've taken off of Ricardo's Nugget Bridge blog, which is every single top cut team that Whimsicott has ever been in since VGC 16 as the format started. As you can see here, it's actually been in quite a lot of top cut teams throughout the format. 18 regional top cuts and 8 national top cuts, which shows that it's definitely a Pokemon that can have a place on the right team with its just silly amounts of support. I'm not going to go into detail about all these teams here because I don't really know what they all do, but you can see the kind of common archetypes that the Whimsicott can fit into. You've got Gravnosis here, used by my fellow Jet, the Sax lad Thomas Plater. Breogre, Adamak there. On certain big 6 variants, you've got it on double primal as well. Pairs very well with a lot of things just because of the utility of everything it can do. And that's something we're going to talk about just now. So why use it over anything else? It's like why look at it over anything else? As I've mentioned earlier, it's the fastest Pokemon with Prankster in the game, which if things like Thundurus are giving you problems and you're like, oh, I need to taunt them, but they taunt me before I can taunt them, Whimsicott is a great answer to that, because Whimsicott doesn't even need to run max speed to outspeed Thundurus and taunt it before it can do anything else. What originally led me to using Whimsicott in the first place was back in 2015 format, I used Liepard, but I kept getting annoyed that Amoonguss kept rage powdering away all my Encores. Whimsicott, being a grass type, isn't affected by rage powder, so you know, providing Amoonguss doesn't have a poison move, Whimsicott can shut it down quite nicely. As you've seen from the teams and all the variety of different teams that it's top cut with, like, the amount of support moves means that Whimsicott can provide a lot of different roles for different teams, fitting into quite a lot of their needs. It also has access to 4 unique forms of speed control, which for one Pokemon is a lot. And when you take into consideration that a lot of these will have Prankster as well, you're getting priority speed control, which means you don't need to worry about your Pokemon getting like taken out or OHKO'd or taunted by like Thundurus, for example, before you can get up your speed control. And finally, it has fairly decent stab options. While it's not the strongest thing, and you probably don't want it to be attacking, like, its super effective coverage is fairly decent in the metagame, what with Kyogres and like dragons everywhere. Next, I'm going to talk about some of its moves in a little bit more detail. Encore is probably the first move that you consider when you think of Whimsicott. What's Encore do though? Encore locks the target Pokemon into the last move that it used. So something like Whimsicott with already high speed and the Prankster ability making it, you know, its Encore priority. Protecting in front of Whimsicott is a big risk, because if you protect obviously to save your Pokemon, then you've got the risk of the next turn. Whimsicott can then Encore you before you're able to do anything else, because for the most part, unless you're Talonflame, which is naturally faster than Whimsicott and also has a priority ability, then the likelihood is it's going to Encore you before you can get a move off. Locking Pokemon into non-offensive moves can effectively shut them down and force your opponent into situations where they either have to do nothing or switch and make their switch vulnerable. Like, good moves to take advantage of this, however, are, as I've mentioned already, Protect. If Geomancy Xerneas is giving you a lot of problems, locking it into Geomancy again is especially good, because once you Geomancy again and the Power Herb is gone, they can't switch that turn, so they have to burn an extra turn just waiting for the move to charge up, which means that Xerneas is effectively trapped in for an extra turn doing nothing. And Fake Out is another good one, because it's a move that only happens that one turn on the initial switch in. Encore puts your opponent on a lot of pressure, meaning that they can't really do what they want to do to you. You're dictating what they do to you. It doesn't just stop at non-effective moves. Like, you could lock them into moves that they necessarily aren't their best options. Like, for example, if Salamence and Whimsicott are next to each other and the opposing Groudon went for Precipice Blades last turn, while Whimsicott's going to take damage from the Precipice Blades, it does resist it, so it's not going to get KO'd, and the Salamence takes no damage. So Salamence and then Whimsicott can deal with firing off powerful Hyper Voices and kind of ignore Groudon for a couple of turns while it does kind of minimal damage. VGC 16ness is really important because such a powerful metagame where everything's so hard hitting, losing a turn could be the difference between turning a game around into your favor or not. Another move that I particularly enjoy is Worry Seed, which replaces the target Pokemon's ability with Insomnia. Why is this useful though? Things like Primal Kyogre and Primal Groudon, their weathers aren't permanent like Drizzle and Sand and the old weathers. Once the ability's gone, their ability, like that weather disappears. So Groudon loses its immunity to water if the sun goes away. So if you have Whimsicott next to Kyogre but the sun is up, you could remove Groudon's ability, getting rid of the sun, and meaning that Kyogre could just fire off Origin Pulse or Water Spout or Scald, and Groudon can't do anything to stop it. Worry Seed can work in a more defensive way as well, because if Salamence is particularly giving you problems, getting rid of Aerialate means that it's no longer got Stab and the Aerialate boost. It's just using a normal type Hyper Voice or Double Edge on you, which makes it moves considerably weaker. Also, if you don't care so much about your own Pokemon losing their abilities, Worry Seeding yourself in the face of Smeargle can keep you awake for long enough to deal with it. So many things right now rely on their abilities to do heavy damage or keep themselves safe. Mawile without huge power isn't very strong, and Kangaskhan without Parental Bond is very much the same. They become much less threatening without their abilities, and like I said with Salamence, if you have Whimsicott paired with Gengar, and you remove Salamence's Aerial, suddenly Salamence can't touch Gengar, something that it would normally threaten quite badly with quite heavy damage. Gengar is now immune to everything it can do. This is particularly useful on teams that really rely on you having the weather control as well. If Groudon and Kyogre in particular are giving you problems, being able to remove their abilities and thus their immunities is a really good way of dealing with them quickly. The next move is the first move I ever really made a team around Whimsicott using, and that's Fake Tears. Tears is fun because it lowers your opponent's special defense, well, it lowers the target's special defense by 2 stages, which effectively cuts it in half. This makes a lot of your special attacking moves a lot more powerful, and a lot of the time it's not really something that you see coming immediately. Being able to surprise KO something that normally wouldn't be concerned about what it's facing down is a great way to build momentum in your favor. I've decided to include some calculations, like just kind of generic ones, like to kind of show off the impressiveness of how much difference being -2 special defense can make. I've went with Kyogre because it's the most powerful special attacker in the game at the moment. But if we go for just the kind of like the old 2014 Rare Rizzo spread for Ferrothorn, a modest max special attack Primal Kyogre's Water Spout against a -2 special defense 252 52 special defense Ferrothorn has a 62.5% chance to OHKO. Ferrothorn's not something that would probably be coming in here thinking, oh, I'm not scared of Kyogre, I'm here to stop that thing. But then all of a sudden its special defense is lowered by 2 stages and there's a good chance it'll get knocked out in 1 hit. When your main Kyogre, check, has potential to be OHKO'd by it just because of a powerful support move like that, it really forces you to kind of play on the defensive, which if Whimsicott is also running Encore, another one of his good moves, you can punish, because then if they go on the defensive, you can trap them into doing nothing. Ferrothorn's not the only Calca included though. Mega Rayquaza in the Heavy Rain is guaranteed to be OHKO'd at -2 special defense, and this is probably my favorite thing to use for Fake Tears for, which is getting surprise knockouts on full HP Cresselias, which is what I used to do in 2015 format with my Mega Gengar and Fake Tears. But a modest max special attack Kyogre's Water Spout on -2 max HP, max special defense boosted in nature Cresselia is a guaranteed OHKO. That's max Cresselia, and it's an OHKO. Fake Tears is nothing to scoff at. I've also got the speed control options here that I mentioned earlier. While some of these are not as common as others, there's still kind of fun options that can be used in kind of more fun teams. Tailwind is probably the most common one you'll see, and for good reason. It's probably the best one one of the best ones there. Doubling your speed for 4 turns really puts you in the driver's seat, because it's much harder to be hacked by your opponent if you're going first and you're the only one getting attacks off. In a similar vein, Trick Room works as well, and Trick Room is something that not a lot of people expect in Whimsicott because it's not something that's seen every day. Trick Room reverses the priority of all Pokemon, meaning that all the slowest ones go first. And if your team particularly looks like it would abuse Tailwind, but it can also work in Trick Room, them setting up their own Tailwind only for you to Trick Room can put you at a huge advantage if they don't see it coming. The other 2 are a bit more gimmicky. But Stun Spore is a cool option because it's one of the only, it's not reliable, but it's one of your only options to paralyze opposing Groudon. Something that normally Groudon is immune to, because Thunder Wave is the only common way that paralysis is spread. Unfortunately for Stun Spore though, it won't work on grass Pokemon. So you wouldn't be able to use it on opposing Whimsicott or Ferrothorn or Amoonguss if you wanted to paralyze them, for example. The last move is a move I've only seen used by one person, and that's my friend Steve, who top cut UK Nationals with a Cotton Spore Whimsicott, which effectively works as a reverse tailwind, where you lower your opponent's, both of your opponent's speed, because it's a spread move, by 2 stages, cutting them in half. While it doesn't work for a set number of turns like tailwind, it puts pressure on them because it means that they can't get their speed back without switching out. So if they're not a Trick Room team, they have to switch, or they're always going to be in the downward position, like facing your attacks before they can get anything off themselves. This next slide here is about Whimsicott's potential offensive moves. Sometimes you don't want to have just support moves on your Whimsicott, just in case he does get taunted and then you're stuck doing nothing. Because Whimsicott isn't particularly strong though, I've not gone with a lot of moves here, and I've just gone with the only ones that would really be worth using. Grass Knot is especially good because it is a special type grass attack that increases in damage but the heavier your opponent's Pokemon are. Most of the restricted Pokemon are in the highest weight class, which makes Grass Knot a base 120 power attack. To put some perspective into that, a max special attack Timid Whimsicott's Grass Knot against a max HP Primal Kyogre can do almost up to 50%, has a chance to 2-hit KO. Being able to deal with your opponent's Kyogre with a Whimsicott, which they probably wouldn't be too scared of because they wouldn't think of it doing any damage to them, would be a great way to put pressure on them and catch them off guard, and especially if they're focusing on taunting it and stopping it from using stuff like Fake Tears or Encore. Because Groudon doesn't resist Grass Knot because it's part ground, part fire, it would also do quite a hefty chunk of damage to Groudon as well, probably about half of what it does to Kyogre, which is still good damage. It might be enough to put it in range of other attacks, like say you're running your own Groudon, but you're worried that the Precipice Blades or the Earth Power isn't going to be a guarantee, but alongside the Grass Knot it probably will be. Moonblast is another option, though I probably wouldn't recommend it as much as I would Grass Knot. It's a base 90 power special fairy move that has a 10% chance to lower your opponent's special attacks by 1 stage. If you're lucky, that could be really handy, and it could save you in certain matches if you get a clutch special attack lure on a Kyogre or a Xerneas that would have meant that your Pokemon survives when it otherwise would have died. The problem with Moonblast, I find though, is even max special attack Timid Whimsicott's Moonblast on 0 HP, 0 special defense, naive Salamence, so that's with a special defense hindering nature, isn't a guaranteed OHKO. It does 98.8% max. You can guarantee the OHKO by, well, okay, you can't guarantee it, but you can get the chance of the OHKO by going modest. But you lose out on Whimsicott's biggest factor, which is its high speed. And sacrificing that speed just to get the KO on a Pokemon isn't always the best way to go, I don't think. Not when you should be using Whimsicott as a big supportive member of your team. Quite a big attacking option that Whimsicott has is Endeavor. As Whimsicott typically runs Focus Sash, the likelihood of it being at 1 HP is quite high. And Endeavor means that you do damage to your opponent that brings them down to the same number of HP that you do. So if you're in 1 HP and you Endeavor them, they're going to be on 1 HP too. Obviously this is big. That's a lot of damage to be taking. This is especially useful for breaking through big things that you don't know necessarily how to deal with otherwise. Although being normal, it means it doesn't work on ghost type Pokemon. So if a Giratina is particularly annoying you, it's still going to annoy you. I have a short list of the other moves that I think are useful in Whimsicott here. And these are all different things that you can run with the other ones, or you can run independent of the other ones I've shown. Like, Whimsicott has so many different support options that you can literally just pick any 4 of them and you'll probably have a pretty good support Pokemon to use in your team. Taunt is probably one of the more obvious ones. Being able to taunt opposing Smeargle or Thundurus or just anything that its support moves, or Xerneas is another big one, and stopping them from doing what they would be doing to disrupt you, like setting up Geomancy, paralyzing you. Taunt can also work particularly well if you can somehow lock them. Like, if for example you knew your Whimsicott was slower than another prankster Pokemon, you could taunt them as they go for a support move. So provided they don't taunt you. So say like Thundurus goes for the paralysis on whatever your Pokemon next to Whimsicott is, and then you, for whatever reason, your Whimsicott's like slower, you taunt it, and then the next turn it has to go for the attacking move, and then you can encore it, and then all of a sudden Thundurus is stuck not being able to do anything. This only works if it went for the move beforehand, before getting taunted. If you taunt them before the move goes off, you won't be able to encore them into anything because the move didn't happen. Safeguard is arguably one of the most useful things Whimsicott can do right now, as Smeargle's pretty much everywhere. As is Paralysis from either Thundurus or Cresselia, and sometimes even Kyogre I've seen. Being able to stop sleep, paralysis, burn for 5 turns is really big at the moment. Games can be won just on sleep turns alone right now. And getting Prankster Safeguard as well is particularly good, because it's not something that could be quick guarded away, like Taunt or Encore. And the only thing they could do to stop you would be to fake you out and put you to sleep before you can get the Safeguard off, or somehow taunt you before you get it off, which is unlikely. Charm is a move piloted by Adam Mack, the first person in VGC 16 to top cut with a Whimsicott. Charm lowers the target Pokemon's attack by 2 stages. This is effectively a double Intimidate, which is really important. With things being so physically dominating like Groudon and Kangaskhan and sometimes Salamence, cutting their attack stat in half could really keep a Pokemon alive for a lot longer. So Charm's a particularly good move when your team struggles with being a bit too frail, but it needs to keep its speed or its attack. Or perhaps you just want to make a team that is more on the defensive side and works on making the games drag out as long as possible without your opponents really being able to do much damage to you. Grass Whistle is popularized by Baz Anderson with the whole Baznosis. Setting up Gravity, Grass Whistle's accuracy goes up to 91%. Plus it's a sound based move, which means that if they're behind a substitute, they're not necessarily safe from being Grass Whistled. They can still go to sleep. Grass Whistle should really only be used on Gravity teams though, because its 55% accuracy isn't something that you'd want to be relying on or out of Gravity. Though some people have gotten lucky with it. Tom. The last 2 are a bit more generic options. Helping Hand is particularly good because it out-prioritizes both Protect and Fake Out, meaning that if you think your Whimsicott is going to get faked out that turn, you can Helping Hand so it's not doing nothing, and your opponent and your teammate will get a nice 50% boost before getting the damage off. I've found that Helping Hand is a good replacement for Fake Tears if your team isn't especially offensively heavy, because Helping Hand boosts them both, so you don't need to choose. The last one is everybody's favorite move, Swagger. I don't really need to say much about Swagger. We all know and we all hate it, unless you win with it, in which case you suck. Going on to the EV spreads, I've set some benchmarks here of things you might want your Whimsicott to do. There isn't a great deal, so kind of bear with me. 220 speed Timid Nature will outspeed max speed Timid Thundurus, which for the most part, unless you want your Whimsicott to be max speed so that it can deal with other Whimsicotts with the whole 50-50 speed ties, this is usually the speed that you want to be hitting, because you want to be able to guarantee you're outspeeding Thundurus if your team requires it, at least. Like if you're taunting, if you've got taunt for the sole reason of stopping Thundurus, or if you've got certain moves that you don't want to be taunted before you can get off, like your own Worry Seed or Fake Tears or Safeguard, for example. Next speed benchmark is 132 speed Timid Nature, which outspeeds max speed base 100s. This is important for beating for outspeeding Kangaskhan and Salamence before it Mega Evolves. This speed stat I'd think is only more particularly useful if you have more offensive moves on your Whimsicott. Like for example, you don't want your Whimsicott to not be able to get an Endeavor off on Kangaskhan if the Kangaskhan's the thing it wants to hit. Being slower than Kangaskhan and trying to Endeavor, it's not going to end well. 52 speed timid nature outspeeds max speed base 90s, which is most of the restricted Pokemon, to be fair. Most importantly, you've got primals, Kyogre and Groudon, as well as Pokemon like Dialga and Ho-Oh. Again, this is only something that's important to you if you want to be able to hit them with non-priority moves, such as Grass Knot in the case of the primals, or Endeavor in the case of, if that's what you're running and you want that to hit everything else. So these two speed stats really shouldn't be taken into consideration unless you've got a very specific offensive reason for Whimsicott to be hitting them, like Endeavor or Grass Knot. On the defensive side of things, 0 HP max defense timid nature will survive a Jolly Mega Kangaskhan's return of frustration. This can be particularly useful if you don't have room for a Focus Sash on your Whimsicott and are running Mental Herb to prevent it from being taunted. Or if you want Whimsicott to still be able to get an attack off the turn after, factoring Kangaskhan in as well, which obviously doesn't care about Focus Sashes in any way, shape or form. Take quite a bit more investment to be able to live Double Edge though, and 196 HP, 244 defense is more, like with a timid nature, is really the kind of, is what you need to survive Jolly Double Edge from Kangaskhan. This unfortunately is quite a bit more investment than you probably be wanting to put in, but it does mean that you are still able to outspeed the primals. So this defense might be particularly useful on an Endeavor set, which is built to outspeed the primals and get the Endeavor off before the primals hit you with one of their big heavy attacks. The final damage calculation is 196 HP, 244 defense on a defense boosting nature. I put relaxed here because relax is what you'd ideally go for if you're using Trick Room Whimsicott. This survives Adamant Mega Kangaskhan's Double Edge. And if you're running Trick Room Whimsicott, this is the biggest thing. This is the biggest problem for you in getting Trick Room off, is getting KO'd before Trick Room goes off. Because while Trick Room does get a Prankster boost, it's still -6 priority with the Prankster boost. So it's still going last no matter what. And if Whimsicott is your only setter for Trick Room, making sure that it's bulky enough to live and get it off is really important. That's all I've got for Whimsicott just now, and I hope you found this helpful. Feel free to follow me on Twitter and leave comments if you would like to see this sort of thing again. This is my first time doing it, so I've been kind of a bit nervous, so hopefully I'll be a bit more informative and a bit better with time, if that is, again, like I said, something you'd like to see more of. Because, like I said earlier, people have said thank you to me for helping them, and I would actually like to do something that I think is kind of helpful, and maybe give you ideas and options about things you might not have considered beforehand. If I do another one of these, the next Pokemon I want to talk about is probably Raichu. So again, comment down below if you think that's something you'd like to see. And again, thank you for watching.